Tomorrow is Bodhi Day in some countries. It is the day that some Buddhists commemorate the moment that Siddhartha Gautama attained Buddha nature, enlightenment, while meditating under a tree. He became enlightened and found a path that others could follow to be released from the cycle of life and death that all life experiences. It seemed appropriate to think about this aspect of Buddhism today because many Unitarian Universalists practice meditation and some consider themselves Buddhist in spiritual orientation. Buddhism is an amorphic grouping of ideologies and beliefs that derive from the enlightenment of Siddhartha Gautama about 600 years before the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. Some see similarities between Jesus and Siddhartha, but I tend not to. They seem similar only in their awareness of human suffering and in their adherence to spiritual practice. Of course, Jesus and Siddhartha also share similarities that all mystics have. Jesus is much more outspoken about spirituality, leading to a just and equitable society than Siddhartha is. The faiths of both men, though, have been exploited by the powerful and corrupted historically. Some might take umbrage at the remark that Buddhism is an amorphic grouping of ideologies and beliefs. After all, the Noble Eightfold Path is something that is basic to Buddhist belief. That is true, it is basic. Though Buddhists agree on that, they are divided among themselves about the nature of the Buddha, Buddhist ethics, the role of deities, the practices of Buddhism, the different commentaries, whether lay people should be taught deeper forms of meditation, and what the relationship should be between the Buddhist religious community and the society and the government. Not only do Buddhists have these disagreements, they are often less knowledgeable about different forms of their religious community than Western Christianity is about the diversity of Christian belief and practice. In the 1960s, an international Buddhist conference was held in Bangkok, Thailand. It would be the first time ever that Buddhist communities all over the world would gather together. And it was a major event. It's unimaginable that in more than 2,000 years, Buddhists all the world over had never gathered to share their thoughts, their worship. And the people who organized this, the Thai monks, were shocked when Japanese monks asked if housing would be provided for their spouses and children. The Thai Buddhists did not realize that there were Buddhist monks who were not celibate. Clearly, Buddhists were unaware of the ways that Buddhism was lived in different places, even places that weren't extremely far away. In my first year in seminary, I shared housing with a Japanese man who was an instructor at a Japanese Buddhist association that is aligned with our own movement, the Unitarian Universalist Association. My housemate, Takashi, told me that he could not understand American Buddhists. They were totally unlike any other group of Buddhists. He told me that though Buddhism is not explicitly theistic, it coexists in Asia with theistic beliefs or supernatural beliefs, not necessarily theistic ones. It has surprised him, therefore, that so many Buddhists in the United States were atheists. He could not understand how Buddhism, a faith based in the belief in a form of reincarnation, could exist in the United States without much attention to the idea of reincarnation or mysticism. He observed that most American Buddhists believed in the practice of meditation and a few other Buddhist ethical perspectives, but did not believe in the reason why Buddhists everywhere else were meditating and understanding the Eightfold Path. They did so in other places and the cycle of life and death, samsara. For Takashi, American Buddhists were like people who might pray but did not believe in God or gods. If you're an American Buddhist, though, do not despair too much about Takashi's complaints about our interpretation of our form of Buddhism. It should be remembered that despite putting on a pleasant face to the world, the predominant forms of Buddhism are not in community with each other because of ideological differences. They do not usually coexist with each other due to national boundaries and distance, and therefore do not need to compete ideologically for dominance in the nations where they are prevalent. In some of the nations where Buddhism is a dominant religion, Buddhism is the religion of state, supported primarily by the government. That often causes problems with the practice of the faith. In the case of China, where the three major forms of Buddhism did exist, the experience of Maoist communism was so violent that all forms of Buddhism were persecuted. Their differences were minimized by their need to work together. It is often forgotten that Buddhism is an offshoot from Hinduism, much like Christianity is an offshoot from Judaism. Like Jesus, it is likely that Siddhartha Gautama did not intend to found a new religion. He was trying to found a new sect of Hinduism, a new path that would take Hindus to a different place. The Buddha found through his enlightenment a path out of the constant cycle of reincarnation in Hinduism. Hindu reincarnation is the belief that in death, one moves from one existence to another existence. One is reborn. And this is a very primary Hindu belief. Many Westerners think of reincarnation as a wonderful religious idea, with the individual living, dying, and living again for eternity. Yet in Hinduism, this cycle of birth and death, over and over, is considered true, but without end. Yes, wisdom is acquired in the soul that experiences it, but there's no sense of finality. One cannot say, I have reached the transcendent existence where my soul does not need to experience anything else. You don't have any choice. You're going to die and be reborn again. It's something that is a constant cycle. There's no way out. That is what Buddhism is intended to provide, a way out. Like Christianity, which became a religion distinct from its origins in ancient Palestine, the awakening of the Buddha spread beyond ancient India to places where Hinduism had never existed, and it became a religion different from its origins. For example, ancient Japan had no belief in reincarnation, yet the people there found something spiritually significant in the practice of meditation without taking in the idea that they were doing so to end samsara, the cycle of living, dying, and living again. They still said Shinto prayers to their ancestors and their deity, and they also meditated to Buddhist practices. Unlike Christianity, where Buddhism was introduced, it tended to merge with the local religions, and people could practice both religions without persecution. This is ironically least common in India, where Buddhists arose. Hinduism is deeply culturally embedded in India, and change was not always welcomed. Buddhism's spread was not through missionaries converting the locals, as it was mostly by commerce. Buddhism became the predominant religious perspective of entrepreneurs in Asia, and it spread in areas initially where merchants resided. Perhaps those who were accustomed to dealing with people from other lands were more open to new than the general population was. In this environment, Buddhism became a new religion and not just a Hindu sect. After all, though it began as a path out of reincarnation in Hinduism, it became a new religion to people who never believed in reincarnation, samsara, in the first place. That is the journey of Buddhism, and it started with one person meditating under a tree in India. Siddhartha Gautama, the one who believed he was awakened, discovered 8 practices that could help one transcend the earthly existence and suffering. He believed that they would awaken the spirit in one enough to rise above the earth. He called this the Noble Eightfold Path. For the Buddha, the first step in the Noble Eightfold Path, right view, was the most important. It was resigning from the delusion that one could find fulfillment in worldly pleasure, and the belief that seeking such and our beliefs would have consequences in the future after our deaths, even in our future existence. For the Buddha, one realizes that following one's urges is not helpful for oneself and others. This first point leads to the second point, right resolve. In this factor, once one has realized the problem with reincarnation, samsara, one resolves to leave home, renounces the worldly life, and follows the Buddhist path. The practitioner resolves to strive toward nonviolence and avoid violent and hateful conduct. This is not an easy decision because of the nature of many Asian cultures in which one has responsibilities based upon caste and family. Siddhartha Gautama knew this. He was a prince, and his decision to leave that position had consequences for his family and his people. The third factor calls us to control how one communicates. Right speech is what it is called by the Buddhists. Buddha is opposed to lying, abusive speech, divisive speech, and idle chatter. It is clear that the Buddha would not approve of American politics. However, it is difficult to understand how one can communicate at all without being divisive at times. One of the potential complications from this third factor, the necessity to control how one communicates, is that a Buddhist monk needs to be silent often and to be able to judge when his or her communication could be difficult or abusive or divisive. Fourthly, the Buddha requires that those who follow this path must not kill or injure, not steal, not engage in sexual misconduct, and have no material desires. This is called right conduct. These seem like such sound ethical guidelines, but the Buddha does not impart them as such. It is not for social reasons only that he abhors violence, theft, sexual misconduct, or things, possessions. It is because such urges tie one to one's physical existence, and they defeat the purpose of transcending the cycle of life and death. They show an investment in life. One accepts that ties to physical existence that are not benevolent are chains that hold one in the pattern of suffering. The fifth factor is similar to the fourth. It's called right living. That means no trading in weapons, living beings, meat, liquor, or poisons. This is more difficult for us, perhaps, than the previous factor. The Buddha puts a similar value to trading slaves as to trading liquor. For most people in our culture, though, the prohibition against trading in meat would be the most difficult to practice and perhaps to understand. Remember, though, that in Buddhism, all life will eventually ascend a scale of existence into sentience. The cow that is slaughtered will eventually, through birth and rebirth, become a person and may retain some sense of harm from previous forms of being. Violence against any creatures may affect that process and give a future human being a subconscious response to be dealt with. The other factors, weapons, slavery, liquor, or poisons, are things that are harmful to human beings, and one practices to do no harm. That does not mean that Buddhist monks have always refrained from those practices, though. They are often stated as guidelines, but unfortunately are difficult for some to keep. The sixth path is that of controlling one's senses, right effort, not giving in to unwholesome states that cause one to go off track. Being aware of one's drives might prevent one from derailing into unrealistic thoughts, losing curiosity, energy, becoming joyless, tense, unfocused, and craving or aversion. These are more of a sensory perception than an ideological one in some ways. The seventh factor is important, and it's probably the easiest for us to understand. It's called right mindfulness. I think that this is akin to what Freud called the superego. It regulates the way one thinks. One acquires an iron will that guards or watches over the mind. The stronger it becomes, the weaker the unwholesome states of mind become. It weakens their power to take over and dominate thought, word, and deed. This is the capacity to have a part of the mind regulating the way the mind thinks. It is like having a police officer in your head who arrests negative thoughts or paths that might lead to a way, might lead away from the goal of awakening to the truth. Surprisingly, the eighth path is the one we Westerners might find the strangest. It's the eighth path is meditative practice. For most of us in the West, the most distinctive aspect of Buddhism is meditation, isn't it? It is important to the Buddha, but it is only one way that awakens to the truth. Meditation is the only practice of interest for most Westerners, yet it is perceived as one of 8 vehicles to nirvana within Buddhism. The Eightfold Path is generally agreed upon by Buddhists as the path that leads to awakening into truth that our culture, programming, history, and essential drives cause us to miss. This is both a spiritual path and an ethical path as well. For we who might not be able to follow this for one reason or another, Buddhism holds the truth that eventually all souls will become awakened through enough passages, through the repetitive cycles of life and death. The Mahayana school of Buddhism believes that it might take multiple lives for a soul to become awakened. However, in Mahayana, it is possible to begin by practicing one or more of the Eightfold Path in each lifetime, gaining a sense of comfort with the path gradually from life to life until one is ready to make the commitment to become a Buddha, as all life eventually will. This is what Buddhism is like. It's not always an easily accessible religious tradition for some of us. As Unitarian Universalists, we are open to the possibilities that many different religious paths might reveal. And there is a Buddhist group in this congregation that meets regularly, if you're interested. Tomorrow is the day commemorating the awakening of Siddhartha Gautama to the truth that others had previously experienced. There were other Buddhas in Buddhism, but they were not called to enlighten the rest of us. He was the Buddha called to share the way with us to reach this truth. for Buddha and all other seekers who might lead us to wholeness and kindness and a new way of being. May we be truly grateful. So be it. Blessed be. Amen.